Hello and welcome to another Overlord lore video, and today we are going to take a look at what has happened almost 4 years ago in Overlord's 3rd season in order to get up to date when the 4th season finally drops. But before we're going to do so, let me thank my Patreons for supporting this channel, as well as all users of the YouTube thanks function who made one-time donations. And with that said, let's start with the first and easiest thing to recap: Enry's arc. From a mere peasant girl to Enry the Bloody, the merciless leader of one of the strongest armies in the entirety of the New World. Now, her arc has basically concluded. Don't get me wrong, there will be an aftermath for the Battle of Karn, and the village will stay relevant, especially later in Season 4, but the big battle has commenced already. All you need to know is that Enry, who had already summoned the goblin troop earlier on, with one of the horns of the goblin general, used the other to summon 5,000 goblins. She was able to do that because she had good relationships with the goblins, and likely because she was attacked by a detachment of the Greater Royal Army, led by the Crown Prince Barbaro, in order to keep him away from more dangerous battles. But with the summoning of Enry's goblin army that annihilated Prince Barbaro's forces, the Crown Prince was forced to withdraw, only to then be intercepted by the forces of Nazami under Lupus Regina, who toyed with and later killed Barbaro once and for all. And as far as the Kingdom of Ries is concerned, they had lost the battle on the Cuts Plain decisively. King Ramposa fell into desperation and despair, so Enec and Rennar have taken over the day-to-day business. Gazev Stronov, the once strongest man of the kingdom, dueled Einsulgon, and rather predictable, died by his hand, and he will stay dead, due to Einsulgon killing him with the true death spell, thus preventing any resurrection by low-tier resurrection magic from happening. With so many first and second-born sons killed on the Battle of the Cuts Plain, at the hands or rather hooves of the Dark Young, the entire nation is in a political emergency and in great turmoil. A turmoil Nazami now seeks to exploit. But with that said, I want to mainly focus on the Empire storyline, because it was by far the most important and the most complicated. And this is especially important because Season 4 will basically be a seamless continuation of Season number 3. This is due to the novels 7, 9 and 10 being basically one arc, mainly about the Empire, with various climactic spots in each of them. And speaking about climactic things, Shaltyr's fight with Einsulgon was also the finale of the volumes 1, 2 and 3. And all plot points eventually had led to this main fight, from Einsulgon battling the Sunlight Scripture, thereby establishing the theocracy and the scriptures in general, to Eins battling the rogue Clementine and being rather dismissive of knowledge about Shaltyr's change of heart, so to speak, and finally all the way to the mind control of Shaltyr herself at the hands of the Black Scripture. And as you probably have guessed, this also means that a big climactic battle will take place in Season number 4. And with that said, let's go over the Empire's plot points, because at the start of the 7th novel, or the 3rd season, Eins reluctantly agreed to Demiurge's plan to lure invaders into his tomb, in order to gain a pretext to make Emperor Jircniv come to the tomb himself, in order to then display his power and finally conquer Irantel with the Empire's aid, in order to then show off the power of Nazami, and thus intimidate everyone by sheer amount of supreme power. So Eins first and foremost entered the capital of Arvintar in order to meet Fluda Peridane, the legendary Triad Wizard, who protected and aided the Empire ever since its very founding over 200 years ago, and he was the first and thus far only court magician, all the way back when the first emperor had ruled, and he was also a trusted advisor and teacher of Emperor Jircniv himself. So Eins, disguised as Momon, showed up, put off his ring, and thereby put Fluda on his knees, making him beg Eins to be allowed to study magic under this undead god of magic. Subsequently, Fluda betrayed Jircniv, because the wizard then later revealed that there's a certain tomb, and that it ought to be investigated, despite it being on the kingdom's soil. And of course the emperor goes along with the advice of his trusted teacher. He makes Count Femal, basically one of his spare nobles left over from the initial purge of the empire's aristocracy, to hire a bunch of worker teams to explore a tomb on the kingdom's territory. And workers are basically rogue adventurers who take any, although mostly illegal quests, in exchange for a significant higher personal risk and significant better pay. And that's why Ainz, ever protective of the Great Tomb, didn't really like this plan that Demiurge came up with. He never wanted outsiders to defile the Great Tomb with their mere presence, but since he had no better plan of his own, he didn't want to object either. And masquerading as someone who escorted these workers to the tomb, he actually asked them why they wanted to go to the Great Tomb in the first place, thereby trying to find out their motives, and if they had higher motives indeed, or if it was just good old greed. But the answer given to him was, and I quote, that would be money. Thereby Ainz judged these workers to be just professional thieves and robbers, who deserves everything that they had coming, much to Archer's dismay. He then proceeds with the plan. While Momo, now played by Pandora's actor, stayed outside of the Great Tomb of Nazarick, the workers went in and never came out, which was also a nice, albeit very simplified test of the Great Tomb's defensive capabilities. Only the Elves of Erya Uzruth, who were dragged into the tomb against their will, were spared. And I already made a video about what happened to them, link to it in the description. After all of this went through, Ainz Ulgon gained a pretext to officially send envoys, aka the two floor guardians of the Great Tomb, Aura and Mare, to intimidate and blackmail Jircniv by landing a dragon, one from Yggdrasil that is, in the courtyard of the royal palace in Aventar, and taking out the elite guard and the strongest of the 4 Imperial Knights. And I also made a video about him, also linked in the description. Jircniv is now forced to come to the Great Tomb of Nazarick in order to apologize, but after talking to the confident Aura and the shy and timid Mare, Jircniv tried to exploit the insecure-looking girl by trying to turn her against Ainz, by offering Mare an opportunity to free one of her fellow elves from the yoke of the Empire, by making him go against the bidding of Ainz in order to do so. This small, benevolent transgression would then, in Jircniv's mind at least, be used to then further blackmail Mare into continuing to aid Jircniv, because otherwise he would reveal Mare's transgression to Ainz. But Jircniv not only failed to realize that Mare is a boy, but also that he is completely loyal to Ainz, and therefore neither he nor any of the other subordinates of Ainz could be turned against him, something that Ainz Ulgon demonstrated with a mere hand gesture later in the Great Tomb, the one he had practiced previously in front of a mirror. Jircniv is now forced into an alliance and into hosting Demiurge, disguised in his frog form, in order to prevent anyone catching onto him also being yelled about the Demon Emperor at his royal palace, after Demiurge has already demonstrated to be capable of mind control. This added greatly to the already great stress and paranoid thoughts Jircniv had. So his plan of sowing discord failed, and he then had to use his contingency plan. And step 1 of this plan was to show the world how dangerous Ainz Ulgon is, by asking him to perform his strongest spell on the Katz plane during the battle, or rather the annual war, between the Empire and the Kingdom of Riestais. Or in other words, in front of a great and bipartisan audience, in order to show anyone how powerful Ainz Ulgon truly is, and that it would really require a great alliance to stop him. And because this vital crossroad between the 3 major nations will now be turned into a kingdom of darkness, or the Sorcerer Kingdom, or depending on translation, Eins Ulgon would become a threat that none, neither kingdom nor theocracy, could ignore. If Jircniv would just have claimed that Eins is dangerous, maybe many would have had a very hard time believing him, and might think of it as bragging because Eins was still his ally, or as an internal problem of the Empire. So he truly needed everyone to see what Eins was capable of. And this step of his plan had actually succeeded. Eins Ulgon demonstrated that he is a threat to every nation by unleashing his strongest spell, or at least his most spectacular one. But it was way stronger than Jircniv had anticipated, and as soon as he had heard that Rhea's ties, or rather its army, was annihilated, with 2/3 of its soldiers killed or missing in action, not counting those who went mad with fear, and that his very own army sustained casualties because of how cowardly and hastily they fled the field of battle once they saw one of the dark youngs of Eins approach. Jircniv despaired, and in addition to this, many of his soldiers resigned, while many more begged their emperor to not antagonize Eins Ulgon at all cost. And the entire action and reaction of Jircniv had been of course predicted by Demiurge, since it, and I quote him here, it was way easier to predict the actions of a reasonably smart man than that of a complete fool. Therefore Jircniv now almost despaired and hoped that the Great Alliance is made sooner rather than later. And while the Emperor of Barut battled his fears and angst, Eins Ulgon now founded his own sorcerer kingdom on the lands taken from the kingdom. He also used Momon the Adventurer, who publicly vowed to protect the remaining humans in the city of Irantel from Eins Ulgon, and if necessary slay the Sorcerer King if he ever becomes tyrannical, in order to calm and reassure the populace, and stabilize the young nation, after much of the former population of Irantel had already fled. And a disguised Pandora's actor will not only serve as Eins' enforcer, but also as the person rebellious people will almost guaranteed seek out, thereby ensuring that Eins is always in on any traitorous plans. And since Eins Ulgon has now made Momon the enforcer of his will, Momon would be the one who would have to crush any rebellion against Eins in order to ensure the safety of the rest of the population. Thus he basically communicated to the people that Eins could use them to blackmail him, and that the only true option is to stay quiet and don't rebel. And this shot here is where Season 3 ended, with his subordinates kneeling in front of the Sorcerer King. And if you have by accident clicked on the spoiler version of this video, a non-spoiler version will also be linked in the description. So if you don't want to get spoiled, click away now. And with that said, let's continue. Eins then goes to meet with the Adventurer Guild, only to find it in a sad and abandoned state. Eins feels sorry and wants to restore the Adventurer Guild he spent so much time in as Momon to its former glory. Therefore he meets up with Einsach Pluton, the leader of the Adventurer Guild in Irantel, who established contact with one of his friends, an avid weapon collector, who can arrange a battle in the amphitheatrum of the Empire against its martial lord. Eins wanted to do this in order to recruit more adventurers by showing that he can revive the dead, so basically offering a life insurance policy actually worthy of its name. And this is also where Eins now gets the information about the existence of runecraft weapons in the Dwarf Kingdom, which will compel him to travel to it later in the 4th season. Meanwhile, Jircniv now has chosen to meet the higher-ups of Slain and his own imperial priests in the loud amphitheatrum, and he also hires the adamantite adventurer team known as Silver Thread Bird, in order to protect him, since he now distrusts most of his subordinates, and because Slain has also realized how bad the situation is, And because they saw much promise in the young ruler of the empire, they also sought out an alliance, a grand alliance. But Ein showed up, and instantly the higher-ups of Slayn felt betrayed. They now believe that Jircniv works for the Sorcerer King, and thus any plans of a great alliance have completely failed. After that, Ein will go and beats Gojin, the martial lord of the arena. Then Jircniv offers his empire to become a vassal state, a subject of Ein's, in order for it to survive, because Jircniv now feels that he has no other choice, since all of his plans had been clearly foiled by the hyper-smart mastermind that is the Sorcerer King. And this is basically the entire storyline of the Empire. And with that said, I say thank you very much for watching, and special thanks to Bad Guy Yi, Ben C, Chrissy, Crowley0221, Sia, Death is Mercy, Deathless Dragonlord, Dystopia II, Enigmatic Unicorn, Feralshivan, Guy with That Head, Hector Marino, Hoss, Huster, Jacob G, Jana B, Jason, Chromius, Legendarius, Lelouch Britannia with a Mustache, Lexus Fox, Lord Nishikian Rai, Lord Touch Me, Merovec, Mr. Shoes, Mr. Tweaker, Michael R, Michael Y, Normal Toad, O'Kill, Overlord General Gasper, Paddy Pantom, Personage, Primus 11, Shadow Lightning Wolf, Shrine Keeper, Ted, Texas Deer, The Orc War Boss, Rocket Smasher, T.E. Wang, Vash Hawkeye, Vegito27, Venture Fanatic, Wilhelm, and Zonegon. Thanks guys. Anyway, have a nice day, and I hope to see you all again soon on my next video.